Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, October 4th, 2007. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. Well, this week, Chris Colby, editor of Brew Your Own magazine, gives us an update on his countertop partial mashing experiences. Last year, Chris introduced us to his method of doing partial mashes in a countertop cooler. He's been busy since then refining his processes. Well, if you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. Well, I got an interesting letter following our latest video podcast where Steve baked bread with beer yeast and I brewed beer with bread yeast. Tony from Italy writes, as a new home brewer, lots of my friends ask me why I don't use bread yeast or pizza yeast. That's because here in Italy, yeast for pizza and bread is called lievito di birra. That means exactly beer yeast. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but beer yeast. They call the yeast that they made for bread beer yeast. Tony says there's a friend of mine who owns a pizzeria, and he asked me if I could try this yeast. He says it is more powerful than those sold in supermarkets. After your show, I think I'm going to try it. Well, very interesting. I was not aware of that. So I hope that Tony will write us and let us know how his experiments with beer yeast turns out. Beer yeast that's used for bread and pizza dough. Now, I have to note that following that show, if you're wanting to make a certain style of beer that requires a specific yeast strain, like Belgian ales or Hefeweizens, for example, you're going to be disappointed using bread yeast. In our hoppy little ale that we made with the bread yeast, the yeast characteristics were pretty clean, much like a California ale yeast. And as I mentioned on the podcast, the pale ale that I brewed had quite a lot of hops in it, so that may have hidden some of the more subtle qualities. However, it certainly wasn't disgusting, which is what I would have expected before tasting Michael Tonsmeyer's kvass with the bread yeast. So, if you make a small batch or even a big one with bread yeast, let me know what style you were shooting for and what your results were. I'd be curious to know. I personally am sure that I'll be going back to the standard beer yeast right away, but, it's fun to play a bit with different things, especially with small batches when there's not a lot at stake. I had a couple of questions come in about water. Jack from Wynyard, Tasmania, Australia, writes, where we live, we have no real shortage of rain, and so it's easy to get water, and we also have natural spring water. Having made beer from both supplies, which seem to make good beer, I was wondering, does the rainwater have no minerals, as against the spring water which runs down the hillside? In theory, which would be the best for brewing? I guess the rainwater has less oxygen after sitting in the collecting tank, but I have no idea what the mineral content of the spring water would be. Jack says, any clues? Is rainwater used to make beer anywhere? Well, first of all, Jack, you're making beer with rainwater, so I guess I can positively say that, yes, rainwater is being used for making beer. I don't know about anywhere else in the world, but surely somebody else, somewhere else in the world, is using rainwater to make beer. You would think that rainwater would have little or no mineral content because it's essentially distilled from the process of the water cycle. The sun evaporates the water and then it condenses in the clouds to form water droplets and then falls back to earth. It's similar to distilling where the water is heated into a vapor and then condensed in a cooling process back into liquid and then collected, and the impurities are left behind. As far as oxygen goes, you don't need oxygen in your brewing water until time to pitch your yeast. And at that time, since oxygen is forced out of the wort with boiling, rainwater would be in the same situation as any other water used in the process, as far as oxygen is concerned. So if you made beer from both spring water and rainwater, and both were good, I'm not sure which would be considered best for brewing. Rainwater might have an edge in that it may not have been exposed to the potential of contamination as much as spring water, which might have come into contact with a microorganism somewhere along the way. Also, if rainwater is like distilled water, then you're essentially starting with a clean slate as far as minerals are concerned, and you'd be free to add minerals to match the style of beer that you're brewing. So, I don't know. Not sure if any of that makes sense, but there you go. Another letter on the topic of water comes from Brian in Cleveland, Ohio. Brian writes, on a family trip I take every year, there's a spring there that has a constant flow of extremely cold, almost entirely flavorless water. We've been drinking it for years when we're at this park, and this year it dawned on me that I should try using it for brewing. I collected 6 gallons of it and used the water for everything, including the original steeping of specialty grains and the boil, the water I poured into the primary fermenter to bring it up to 5 gallons, and the water I used for the priming sugar. The beer is aged for 2 weeks after primary fermenting for 13 days, and between the tasting of the beer when bottling and a taste test after 2 weeks, it tastes great. Brian says, my question after all that setup is, after listening to the water show you did with Greg Noonan, he mentioned open water, such as streams, are bad choices, as well as rainwater. But what about springs like this? Could I be introducing some sort of microbe that could be potentially harmful? Or because it's drinkable from the source, should I just relax and have another homebrew? First of all, Brian, you should always relax and have another homebrew, just like Charlie Papazian advises. That's a given. But since you mentioned Greg Noonan's name, I forwarded your question to him. And Greg says, it is always a gamble to add unboiled water to top up a primary. But if I had to choose a water to do that with, my inclination would be to choose spring or well water from a deep spring or well. The icy temperature of the water bodes well. If it is real cold, it is not from a near-surface source spring. Greg continues that it is drinkable from the source is a good sign, but no guarantee that there are not any microorganisms lurking in it. In fact, there's no guarantee with any water source that you yourself have not, quote-unquote, sterilized. On the other hand, I wouldn't get crazy here. If the spring water brews clean beer once, I would be inclined to continue using it as you are, unless and until there's a problem. So I appreciate Greg Noonan taking time out to write back. So I guess the bottom line is, if it works, it's hard to argue with success. So if you're wanting to, especially if you're not going to boil the water, if you're going to use it to top off your fermenter, that's the time where you can introduce microorganisms that you wouldn't have taken care of unless you boiled the water. If you boil the water, then cool it off, then you're in better shape. Okay, let's move on to our chat with Chris Colby of Brew Your Own magazine. Since talking to Chris last year about his using a 2-gallon beverage cooler for countertop mashing and partial mashing, I got one of my own. And you can see it in the most recent episode of Basic Brewing Video. That's what I used to mash my small batch bread yeast beer in. You can see that on the video. And you can see how I modified my little cooler into a full-fledged mash tun. Anyway, in the most recent issue of Brew Your Own magazine, Chris takes us through 10 recipes using countertop partial mashing to bring some extra character into your extract beers. Well, Chris Colby, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
How you doing, James?
I'm doing pretty good. The allergens seem to be affecting you down there in Austin.
I'm getting killed today.
But hopefully you can, between the sneezes, we can talk about your latest article in the October issue of Brew Your Own magazine, Partial Mash Permutations. And we did an episode almost exactly a year ago on your countertop mashing technique. And you've apparently been learning a lot in the past year using this technique. First of all, describe what it is, the basic description.
Yeah, the technique at its most basic is just a simple way to do a countertop, or a simple way to do a partial mash. If you brew in your kitchen, if you're a stovetop brewer, that you can do this partial mash, and it doesn't take up a lot of space, it doesn't cause a lot of mess or whatever. And the basics are, you just take a big grain bag, fill it with 4 pounds of grain, according to the recipe. And then you put it in a 2-gallon beverage cooler, just a little, like cooler that you might take to a picnic or whatever and fill with Kool-Aid or something. And basically, fill that cooler that's got the grain in it now with hot water, at the temperature according to the recipe. And you let that sit, and that's your mash right there. And when it's done, you can just open the spigot on the cooler and drain the wort out. Given that the grain's in a bag and it's just been sitting there for a little while, it sets up its own sort of natural filter bed. And at least most of the time, it works pretty much foolproof without, even having to modify the cooler. Sometimes some people have reported some problems, but usually if you do run into it, just lifting up on the bag a little bit, and that's usually enough to correct the problem. But basically, you run out the wort the first time, then you refill it with hot water, let it sit for about 5 minutes or something. Run out the wort a second time, and you boil those two, along with enough water to bring your kettle up to about 2.5 to 3 gallons, somewhere in that vicinity. You may or may not add a little bit of malt extract at this time, and then you just boil your wort on your stovetop. About 2.5 to 3 gallons as your starting volume. Add your hops. Given that you're using sort of working strength wort, you get a pretty good, you get as good of hop utilization as you would if you did a full wort boil. And then, when you're done, you just cool it down, send it to your fermenter, and, proceed like you would with any other extract beer.
So you've essentially got a 2-gallon mash tun right there on your countertop.
Right. And then, the big advantage of it is, well, there's a couple. One is that when you're partial matching at that scale, you're on sort of low gravity beers, maybe half of your extract weight might actually come from the grains, and at higher, at a sort of normal gravity beer, maybe 30 to 40% of your extract comes from the grains. So you're getting, you're getting a lot of flavor from the actual crushed grains, and you can use then, there's a lot of different base grains out there that there's not a malt extract equivalent of, you can hunt around, and I think they have a Maris Otter malt extract available now, but you can hunt around and find, several different maltsters with different Maris Otter malt extract, or grains. Just a plain malt, not the extract. Finding I only think there's one Vienna malt extract on the market, and I think it also has caramel malts in along with it. But you can go and find maltsters that make there's several different Vienna malts available. So it really gives stovetop brewers, people who are brewing indoor in their kitchen, a chance to explore some of these base malts. Get some different flavors in their beer that they haven't before. And plus, I just think you get a little bit better. I think in malt extract production, that the heat it goes through, especially in the condensation period, I think you lose a little bit of the volatiles and having the partial mash, you get a better, in my opinion, better aroma from the beers, and just tastes more like a real beer than a beer made from malt extract, which can occasionally, especially if you use old extract, it can suffer from what they call extract twang. So anyway, chance to explore new malts, and also I think just a way to improve your beer if you're brewing in your kitchen.
Yeah, you can brew some really awesome extract beers, but if you want to add some complexity from some base malts that you haven't tried before, doing a partial mash in this method will kind of have at least part of your fermentables be something other than just the extract from the bag or the can or the box, I guess.
Yeah, certainly if you get fresh malt extract, there's a lot of it's a fairly reasonable amount of diversity, and there's a lot of beers you can brew. Certainly, almost any standard English ale type thing or American ale, and a few lager types have malt extracts out there for them. But if you want to sort of retain the the simplicity and if you don't have the space to move to a full all grain system, but you want to start utilizing some of the diversity of malts that are out there, this is a great way to do it.
Now, being the geeky nerd that I am, I took your system one step further, and I modified a 2-gallon beverage cooler into what I call a full mash tun. I took the spigot out, and I replaced it with a mesh filter from a braided hose, just so it works on the same principle as my 10-gallon mash tun, only on a 2-gallon scale. So with a little bit of extra effort, you can geek out a little more. And if you're concerned about stuck sparges or lautering with the bag, you can do that as well.
Yeah, that's a very easy modification to make. And since publishing the basic article on the method last year, a lot of people have emailed me about modifications to their mash tuns and ways to make it more complex. When I wrote the article, I was thinking make everything as simple as possible because for one thing, in the test batches it worked the simple way. So why make it more complex? But yeah, you can modify your mash tun to you can use the braided hose method that you did, and that works good because this is a batch sparge method. You could even, if you wanted to, put in sort of a scaled down version of a manifold that you would use in fly sparging. And I've got email from at least one guy who's done that, and that sort of has a little a second 2-gallon cooler perched above that, and the continuous sparge on the thing, and which is great. The everybody one thing about stovetop brewing is the methods people use, and just the way that they the different approaches they take and the different equipment they use is even more varied than at the all grain level. People really sort of come up with their own little way of doing stuff, and so that's cool, I think.
Well, let's go through some of these recipes. Now, you have 10 recipes in this article. You've got an American Pale Ale, a British Bitter, a Scottish Ale, and then you kind of you get more complex. You take this partial mashing method with your countertop mash tun and get more complex than just a standard infusion mash and then combining that with extract. Pick a recipe that goes beyond the basics.
Yeah, well, when I wrote the article, I wanted to do two things. I wanted to take some of the recipes I've had that use grains that there are no malt extracts for, and convert those recipes to this form, and show people what a few of these different base malts taste like. And secondly, to just introduce a couple little twists on the procedure that like you say, you've got your 2-gallon mash tun there, and you're mashing 4 pounds of grain. There's no theoretical reason why you can't do mash regimes that are every bit as complex as a full all grain mash. Just because it's at a smaller scale, it's the grain doesn't know what scale it's at. You can do whatever mashing you want. So yeah, I have several recipes that let people try malt made from Maris Otter barley, malt made from Golden Promise barley. I've got one in there for Vienna. And then I've got different articles or different recipes that show you how to, like, for instance, one of the first sort of simple modifications is one way to keep your temperature sort of, almost absolutely constant. One of the drawbacks of the method is with only 4 gallons of, or with only 4 pounds of grain that you're mashing in 2 gallons, the temperature kind of drops over the course of the mash, which, if you're brewing a drier beer, there's really nothing wrong with that. It just but if you're trying to brew a more malty beer, you'd like to keep that mash temperature up, and so I give a way to do that. And so anyway, I don't know. Do you want to go through some of the recipes?
Yeah, let's go through the details of how people can use this method to do these more complex things. I mean, you even have a decoction in here.
Yeah. Oh, it's not that hard to do a decoction. Well, I guess I can start with the one I was starting to describe there. On the I've got one beer in there that's a Scottish 80, and the idea is you'd like to mash it at a fairly high temperature. 156 degrees is the temperature that I use, and the idea is if you stirred in the mash and started at 156, like 45 minutes later or so, it's going to be down to, it might be down around 152 or 150, and at those temperatures you're developing more of a dry beer, which you don't really want on the Scottish 80. So the simple way to do this is just take a small pot, like an 8-quart pot, or probably a little bit bigger would be better, just to give yourself some room to stir things. But take your crushed grain, add it directly to the pot. Don't put in a grain bag or anything. And then in the pot, add the hot water to it. Or I guess heat the water in the pot and then add the grains was how I did it. I don't know why I'm explaining it backwards. But, heat the 5.5 quarts is what you start with for your mash liquor in the pot. Stir in the grain. And the thing, because it's in a pot, you can add direct heat, which, of course, you can't to a plastic cooler. So, just put a couple pot cooler or, pot holders over the lid to keep in the heat, and just every 5 to 10 minutes, open it up, stir it, take the temperature, and just, apply heat in, 30-second bursts, 45-second bursts, or whatever, and then keep stirring till the temperature stabilizes, and you'll be able to keep the temperature up there. And if you do keep the temperature up, that'll make for a less fermentable wort, leading to a fuller body beer. And then when you're ready to go on with the lautering and the rest of the beer, then you just sort of revert to the basic procedure. Just put the grain bag in your cooler, and just take a measuring cup and scoop all the grains and the liquid from your pot into that, and you're done. You can also, with a pot, and I do it in this recipe, do a mash out. When you're done with your single infusion mash at 156, turn on the heat and stir it, and just let the temperature come up to about 168 to 170 Fahrenheit. That'll be your mash out, and that'll help you lauter a little bit better, and that'll also it should stop at least most of the enzyme action going on in there, so you will retain the less fermentable wort. It won't, the temperature won't drop, and the enzymes won't start working, and while you're lautering, you won't be, gaining fermentability that you don't want.
Using that same theory, you could do a full step mash, with a protein rest and starting at the lower end of the scale, and you could do whatever you wanted to.
Yeah, and in fact, I have a German wheat beer recipe that does that. Or not every single rest, but basically in German wheat beers, one thing that they do to bring out that, it's got that particular yeast-driven sort of nose on the beer, is they mash in low at 99 degrees Fahrenheit, and this brings out a molecule or causes the release of a molecule from the malt called ferulic acid. And then later, this ferulic acid gets processed by the yeast into the 4-vinyl guaiacol. I hope I'm remembering all these details right. But the basic idea of mashing in at that temperature brings out the German wheat beerness is right, and I think I'm naming the molecules right. But anyway, so if you're just mashing in a pot and just using the cooler as your lauter tun, you can mash it at any temperature you want. You can then heat it directly to if you want to go step by step through different rests, and you can look at all grain recipes and find this out. Or you can just do. I mean, I ended up when I do mashes like this, I end up doing a lot of just ramp mashes where I start where I want and then I just sort of ramp it up. Maybe heat up the mash by 1 or 2 degrees Fahrenheit every couple minutes. Of course, you can also hold your mash when you're at a temperature point where you're holding it. You can just come back every 5 or 10 minutes and stir and heat, and you gain a little bit of control over your mashing process, at the expense of you've now messed up another pot, and there might be some splashing when you transfer it, and but I think a lot of people will, there are some kind of brewers who are going to want to just do the simple method because it's simple, it's quick, you're in and you're out, and there's others that are going to are interested more in trying different methods and will enjoy the more convoluted process if it brings about a tasteable change in their beer.
Yeah, but part of the enjoyment of brewing is the process, and I enjoy spending time at the stove or at the propane burner out on the patio, and if a procedure is a little more trouble, it's not that big of a deal to me. You've also got we mentioned decoction. You've got an Oktoberfest beer where you do a single decoction mash. Talk about that one.
Right. The idea of a decoction mash is you'll mash in at a certain temperature, usually in what was once called the protein rest range, and then you simply scoop out some of the mash. Like in a commercial brewery, they'd pump it out. But at a home brewery, you just scoop out some of your mash. Usually roughly 1/3 of the total volume, and you try to get the thicker part of the mash on the bottom. With a lot of solids, and you heat that up to. First, you heat that part up to the saccharification temperature. Usually, hold it just there for like 5 or 10 minutes, just to get those grains converted. Then you actually boil that part, the decoction that you've pulled out. And while you're boiling it, you need to be stirring constantly because otherwise it'll scorch. And then you add that back to your mash tun, and the added heat brings up the temperature to the saccharification point for the whole mash, and then you let that sit. And that's a single decoction, and there are also double and triple decoctions. And the basic idea, at least originally, decoction mashes were a way for brewers to reliably hit temperatures before thermometers were invented, and it also gave them better extract efficiency with malts that were probably both under-modified and unevenly modified. But in this day and age, when homebrewers want to do a decoction mash, it's usually because a lot of people feel that there's a particular malty flavor that comes from decoction mashing these malts. And the Oktoberfest recipe has it's mostly Vienna malt. There's a little bit of Munich malt, and these are two nice sort of lager malty malts. And it's easy to do a decoction on this because you just use you mash everything in the cooler, and you just pull out about 1/3 of it. Heat that up in a soup pot. Just keep stirring, and boil it. Return it to the mash tun. Stir everything in, and you're good to go.
And the beauty about this is it's a smaller volume of mash that you're stirring. So if you've got tendinitis issues in your elbow, it'll be less likely to aggravate them as it will in a full mash.
If you're making like a full grain batch of like double bock or something where you've got a big decoction, But yeah, your arms can be sore at the end of that. And in this case, they shouldn't.
It's good to have a brewing buddy when you do a big decoction.
Yeah, or a mash stir.
You also do a big old barley wine with this countertop partial mash method.
Yeah, the barley wine idea came from an idea that I read about a while ago. We did an article a few years ago on Sammy Claus, the like 14% alcohol, like winter beer. And anyway, we found out one of their methods of production was they would use the runnings, they would use the late runnings from one of their beers as the foundation water or the mash liquor for their next, for the mash of the Sammy Claus. So they were mashing with wort instead of water. And actually, I've been working on a method of doing this at the full all-grain scale, and I'm going to be writing about that in the December BYO. But I did, a small version of it here. And basically what you do is you start out, you do a little mash with 2 pounds of malt instead of the usual 4 in the method. You run that off, and you run it back to, instead of your brew pot, you run it back to, just your water heating pot, your hot liquor tank. And then you add water to make up whatever you lost from absorption of the grain. So you're back at 5.5 quarts of water. But now, instead of water, it's actually dilute wort. It's half a mash worth of grains. And then this time you just put the 4 pounds of grain in the cooler and mash in with the dilute wort. Then you just do your mash, and then from there on, it's just the same as every, the technique in every other case. But you've essentially got more. You've got more extract from your mash tun this time because you've mashed in with wort.
So you're using the sugary wort to make more sugary wort, and so the question is, how long will it be until someone takes that wort and puts it in the mash tun again?
Well, I've actually done that twice now at a full scale for this BYO article. I did two double mashes. I've been calling them reiterated mashes because like you mash and then you run and you start it again. And I've done 2 doubles and I've done 2 triples.
Wow.
And and I found out the hard way. There's a couple sort of unforeseen problems that can arise, but I figured out what to do about them. So it should be when I do the full article in December on that. It should be pretty interesting for people, I hope. Or else I just wasted like 4 very long brew days.
Well, we'll have you back on then to talk about that because there's some questions that I'm thinking of, but I'll save them for then.
Yeah, there's some interesting twists in there, and some I had some theoretical considerations. I thought, well, maybe this isn't going to pan out, and turns out those didn't have any bearing on what I did. But there were some other things I hadn't thought about that sort of, if you didn't know how to counteract them, would throw a monkey wrench in the whole shebang.
I mean, one question that I would have is if you've got the original sugars from the original mash going through the mash a second time, then the enzymes would have another chance to work on those. So that might change the characteristics of those original sugars, so that maybe you get a little more dryness.
Right. Yeah. Because if you don't mash out in between mashes, you're carrying over the enzymes to the next. And actually, because it only makes sense to do this when you're brewing very strong beers. You wouldn't want to go through all this rigmarole and then, dilute it all down to make a normal strength beer. It's actually, or I don't know, maybe someone would, but it's actually only worthwhile to do for very big beers. And on huge beers, you want a good fermentability in the wort because, it's already going to finish high,
That's true.
Just because it's got the,
It starts high.
And if you didn't want it that way you could just do, just add a little bit more time to your brew day and do, a mash out after each stage. But, I did it where I would do the first mash at normal single infusion mash temperatures, and then I would mash in without even heating the water so that the second mash started at 140 degrees.
Mm.
And I'd let that sit for a couple hours. And then, because that gives a real good beta rest and really high fermentability, then I'd heat the whole mash up to normal range and let it sit for about 20 minutes or whatever I needed to feel like I had converted everything.
There's so many variables in this process, so many things to play with.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, that's one of the most interesting things about brewing. Like I was talking to Lonnie Mack last night. He's a guy who's he's built his own home brewery, and that's another thing we're going to be presenting in a future BYO. But he was telling me, for him, like building stuff was as much of a interest in home brewing as actual brewing. And like for me, just tinkering with the process is as much of a draw as just the normal brewing. I've been over the years trying to just come up with little different ways to do this or that, or modify procedures. Of course, everyone modifies procedures to fit their own equipment and setup. But I've also tried to just think of different ways to do stuff, and so there's a lot of options. And I think one of the fun things in home brewing is there's just the plain brewing of the beer, but there's also for depending on what your inclination is, there's if you like building stuff as well, that adds another element. If you like tinkering around with procedures, that's another element. If you just like really looking at different ingredients in depth, there's another element, and it can be fun.
Now, the last beer that I want to talk to you about out of this collection is is it Beelzebub?
Yeah, Beelzebub.
And you say it's a unique style.
Yeah, I've got a keg of this right now. Beelzebub is a beer that we're talking about the barley wine where we used wort to mash in. This basically you use Mountain Dew, the Soda Pop Mountain Dew, as most of your mash water. Yeah, the first mash is with water. Then the second mash where you run off the second wort is Mountain Dew, and then you boil it. There's a tiny bit of hops, and there's also some orange zest that goes in there, and then you run it off to a fermenter, which you filled with the fermenter is the dilution water is Mountain Dew, and anyway, this is I brewed a beer sort of like this. This is an updated rendition of a beer I brewed a couple of years ago, and my wife just shakes her head whenever I tell her I'm going to brew this, and but it turns out first of all, it turns out it looks like Mountain Dew. It tastes like Mountain Dew, only it's got alcohol in it, and the orange zest also brings out. There's a little bit fuller orange nose to it, but it's interesting. It's one of those beers that a lot of the sort of homebrew purists are turn up their nose at, and why are you messing with that, and maybe part of the reason is because to get that reaction out of them. I don't know, but I like it. It's just like I brew a lot of traditional beers. I brew a Vienna lager, where I do a single decoction every time, and very
So you've paid your dues.
Yeah, very homebrew purist, and I love that beer. But this one is it's easy, it's fun, it's different, and it's like I don't know. I would never drink one of these beers after 7:00 at night if I didn't want to be up all night. But it's a great beer that if you're if it's 5 or 6 o'clock, you're done with work, and I don't know. I like playing PlayStation or, doing stuff outside and, have one of those beers and you're like, ah!
It definitely runs afoul of the Reinheitsgebot.
Yeah. I don't think the Germans will be selling this anytime soon. And
well, that might be a fun one to do a small batch on.
Yeah, definitely, because I like it and I'll drink it, but like just the cost of Mountain Dew adds a little bit to the batch,
Well, that one it definitely caught my attention.
Yeah, we had a reader actually a couple years ago had the idea for that and sent in his version of it, and we printed it back then, and I tried it, and a couple other people wrote in and it was like, "Are you serious?" And it was like, "Yeah." And so anyway, this is just a slight update of that. This version has actually more Mountain Dew. I think his ended up, I forget how much he had in there of the total, but this is basically 3/4 of the quote-unquote water you put in there is Mountain Dew.
Now, obviously not Diet Mountain Dew.
No. That would turn out, that'd be interesting, because I don't know the yeast wouldn't consume all the artificial sugar, I wouldn't think, or the Splenda or whatever that is.
But your starting gravity is 1051, and your finishing gravity is 1005.
Yeah, it gets down there because you've got in this recipe you've got the wort from the partial mash, and there's no malt extract at all. It's just after that it's just Mountain Dew because the original gravity of Mountain Dew itself is like 1046. So it's and that's all high fructose corn syrup. So the yeast are just going to chew through that and spit it out, and that's going to make completely fermentable wort. So the only unfermentables are coming from your mash, and just the ratio of that means that it's gonna finish really low, and which is actually nice because it has a nice dry sort of snap to it. It's because it's Mountain Dew, it's got that tartness, because it's like an orange flavored soda, even though it's dyed yellow. Yeah, the beer's got this, that same hideous fluorescent yellow that Mountain Dew is, which is, to me, I love it, but some people are just like, ugh.
I've definitely drank my share of Mountain Dew over my lifetime. Not recently, but I may have to go back and put a little kick into it.
You're a Dew head. This is a brew that you're going to like.
I drank it back when they had the Hillbilly on the bottle. So do you remember that?
Just barely.
The Hillbilly and the Pig?
Yeah, because they had the TV commercial with Yahoo Mountain Dew.
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah, it wasn't the sophisticated energy drink that it is today.
No, it wasn't. Yeah, they were going for Appalachian mountain folk then rather than extreme skateboarders and whatnot.
Well, I grew up in Hot Springs, Arkansas, so I can't make fun of anybody's origins as far as hillbilliness. So, Yahoo, Beelzebub.
Yahoo, Beelzebub. Yeah, Beelzebub there's a Tenacious D song of that name. Hopefully not a copyright infringement.
Well, all right, Chris. It's been inspiring. I actually, I don't usually enjoy reading recipes so much, but these were fun to read. I was kind of brewing vicariously through your experience.
Part of the idea is this article is like the intro is only like 1 or 2 paragraphs long, and sort of the procedures are sort of the meat of the article. So that you'd read the first one gives just sort of an expanded version of the general method, giving the specifics for that beer, but gives the general method, and then some of the later ones just add this twist, add that twist, and I hope I know last year when the article was printed, a lot of people tried the basic method. I know a lot of people messed with adapting the cooler to be a little bit more high efficiency, and less prone to sticking. And so I hope people look at this and get inspired by one of the recipes to either try it or adapt their own recipe that they've been working on, to use one of these methods.
Well, again, I appreciate your time, Chris.
Okay, it's always fun.
Well, thanks again to Chris Colby. You can check out his article in the October issue of Brew Your Own magazine, including the recipe for the Mountain Dew beer. You can get a free copy of BYO by clicking on the banner on basicbrewingradio.com or anywhere on basicbrewing.com. And if you subscribe to the magazine after that, you'll be helping to support this podcast. And thanks to everybody who's done that. It's a great publication. Lots of fun and very useful. Lots of useful information in there. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com. Or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com, and please don't forget to tell us where you're from. And while you're on our site, you can check out our online shop, where you can find great pricing on our DVDs and a combo deal to save you even more. In our first DVD, Introduction to Extract Home Brewing, we walk you through the extract brewing process step by step from boiling to bottling. And in Basic Brewing, Stepping into All Grain, we take you through the all grain process from milling your grain to collecting your wort. And if you watched the Basic Brewing video episode, you can, know that the title of our next video is Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing. You can see a listing of fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order it online. And if you are a vendor and you want to sell our DVDs, get in touch with me. I'll fix you up. Remember, shirts and hats, including our ever-popular Go Forth and Flocculate shirt, also on the site. And thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Hearthgate, which is like a little fence. Keep baby out of the fireplace. It's a good idea. And Microtrends, the small forces behind tomorrow's big changes. Thanks again, everybody. And remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping, and we'll get a little bitty, teeny tiny chunk of that. We appreciate your support. That's all until next week. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson, our buddy in Austin, who also designed our logo. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.